Hey guys, this is our last little set of notes for Unit 1. Today we're going to talk about designing studies, page 36 through 38, or slide of your digital notebook. So at the top, put title notes 1.3.2, designing studies, and we're just going to write down some steps for an effective study. So the first thing you need to do when you're trying to create your study is make a purpose statement. Like, what are you trying to collect data on? What are you trying to find out about it? Step 2, you want to go ahead and determine the population. What do you want to collect data on? Step 3, you want to make sure that you have a large enough sample. You want to choose it at random. So large enough is kind of depends on your situation. You want it to at least be 30. Or you want it to be about 10% of the population if you can. So it just kind of depends on the situation, the context. Step 4, you want to make sure if you're doing like a survey or whatever it might be, you want to generate neutral questions. And then you want to make sure you assign subjects randomly if you're doing like an experiment. What this is going to do, if you assign them randomly, it's going to help avoid bias. And control confounding variables, which is basically things that are kind of like outside of our control. And then something that I mentioned last set of notes is a double-blind study, where neither the participant nor the researcher knows which group they're in. Placebo is like the fake one. So say they were trying to test like a weight loss drug, then some of the people would actually get the actual drug, and then some people would get just like a blank pill that didn't have anything in it. That's a placebo. So that's all we're going to write down for like our little steps, and now we're going to go do a bunch of examples. So we want to go ahead and go to page 103 in our workbooks. So the following survey question was sent to managers and business owners who have registered with the local Chamber of Commerce. Don't you agree that people spend too much time on social networking websites, both at home and at work, and that there should be a limit placed on the amount of time people can spend on these sites so that they're more productive and spend more time with family and friends? It says determine whether bias exists in the question and or in the population being surveyed. If bias exists in the question, explain how the question may be rewritten to avoid bias. If bias exists in the population being surveyed, explain how you could create a sample of people to survey to avoid bias. Do we think that this holds bias? If you read that question, for sure, yes, it does. Couple of ways. These are our notes. You want to write them down. It starts off with, don't you agree? That goes ahead and it adds pressure that yes, you are supposed to agree. Then then it goes to, do you think that people spend too much time on social networking sites and there should be a time limit? Things like that, too much time. mentions having a time limit. These are leading statements where they lead you to think that people do spend too much time. If they're spending too much time, then there should be a limit on it. And then it says, that they should be more productive, spend time with family. Those are all emotional appeals. So those are just some ways that questions can be biased, okay? Adding pressure, leading someone to a statement, appealing to their emotions. Those are all ways to have bias. So what about the population? Who did they ask? Well, they asked business owners and managers. Well, business owners and managers are probably going to be in charge of people, and they're probably going to be looking at people's productivity. So yes, I would agree that there is a population in the bias, because managers / owners may have a skewed response about employees using social network. So how can we rewrite this question to avoid bias, and then how can we change people who we sampled? So instead of saying like, don't you agree, we want to get rid of that. Saying that people spend too much or too little, so maybe instead we change that to being like, do people spend an appropriate amount of time on social media websites? We shouldn't mention anything about there being a time limit. We don't want to appeal to their emotions, talking about spending time with family instead of using it. So we would just ask them instead, we would just say, do people spend an appropriate amount of time on social networking websites? Just straightforward. We didn't throw any fluff in there talking about people's emotions. They should be spending time with their family instead of doing it. We didn't say, that there should be a time limit, anything like that. Appropriate amount. And then instead of just asking managers, right, maybe we should also ask some other types of employees. Maybe we want to randomly select them. So we would just choose a random sample that includes all types of employees. So not just managers and owners. Okay, so that was an example of a question that has bias in both the population and in the question that they used. Example number 2 says a chain of department stores has updated its return policy in one store on a trial basis. The chain is gathering customer feedback by hiring researchers to interview customers on the last Sunday of June about their feelings regarding the new policy. Identify any flaws that exist in the sample survey and ways to eliminate the flaws. So, some flaws we'll talk about first. A chain of department stores, so it's a chain, and they only did one store. So usually, if you want to pilot something, you usually choose more than just one store. It might not work out at one store, but if you tried it at a few stores, you can kind of see. So that's a flaw, and maybe their sample isn't big enough. They should have done more stores. It says that they were asking on the last Sunday of June. They only did one day, and they did a Sunday. So we'll talk about that too. On Sundays, maybe some people who go to church or something aren't going to be there. And then another thing is that they hired research to interview customers. This was like an in-person survey. So a lot of times, I know when I'm at the store, somebody's like, oh, can I ask you some questions? I'm like, no, because you don't want to like talk to someone. So instead, some fixes, says suggest a way to eliminate these flaws, ways that we can maybe fix some of these things, is we could use multiple stores to try it out. We would want to do more than one day. And maybe, if you guys have ever gone to a store, you've seen where like at the bottom of the receipt, they say, take this survey and get entered to win a drawing or something like that. So maybe they do some sort of online incentive survey. For completing the survey instead of being in person. Okay? So there are just some flaws and some fixes. Example 3, it says a potentially fatal virus is spreading among birds. The director of a bird sanctuary found an herbal supplement that claims to reduce susceptibility to the virus. The director decided to test the supplement by having the staff put in the water of every other bird bath in the sanctuary. Can this be considered a randomized experiment? Well, random, right? It says that he put it in every other bird bath. That's not random. Anytime you do every other bird bath, so we put it in this one, this one, this one, that's not random. That has a pattern to it. And if there is like a bird sanctuary and there's like all these bird baths, like these birds are flying around, right? They're going to use this bird bath and they might go over to here, and then this bird bath goes over here and then over there. So they can't really control unless they were like in cages, but it's a sanctuary, so they can't really control that. So is this a randomized experiment? We're going to say no. Every other is not random. Every other bird bath is not random. And they can't control which ones the birds use. All right, 2 more examples. So a lot of these isn't really about like calculations or anything. It's about critical thinking and thinking outside the box, trying to figure out flaws, what's wrong, those kinds of things. So example 4 says researchers for a treatment facility at a local university are seeking volunteers who may have been diagnosed with severe obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. The researchers are asking volunteers to spend 3 months living at the facility and working with faculty and doctoral students to lessen the impact of OCD and their ability to function on society. Determine factors that may skew the sample population. Based on the factors, how might the sample be affected? So some factors, and this happens, sometimes these things can affect, but they took volunteers. So anytime you take volunteers, that is going to affect it because it's not actually random. The people have to live at the facility for 3 months. This could be something that would affect some things, like not everyone can go live somewhere, especially if they have a family or job. And it says it was only people with severe OCD, so they didn't take into consideration if it was like a mild case. So how those things, these are just factors, right? These are things that they said about it, that said volunteers, 3 months living, severe, to work with these doctoral students. Some ways that this could affect it. Volunteers means it's not at random. So there could be some bias. And living commitment, not everyone can live at the facility. Especially people with jobs or families. And it left out minor OCD. So again, that's not like computations, it's a lot of just thinking, critical thinking skills. What did they mention? How could those things affect it? May skew. It's not saying that it's definitely going to be skewed, but it could skew your results. All right, last example, number 5. It says, on the day before your beach vacation, you're trying to decide which sunscreen to buy. You're most concerned about providing maximum protection for your face. Someone told you that any sunscreen with a protection factor SPF greater than 50 is no more effective than one with exactly 50. Design a study to determine how well different sunscreens protect your face, then describe how to create a random sample if the population is large. Finally, indicate whether you chose to conduct a survey, experiment, or observational study. Well, we can't just ask we can't just observe the sunscreen working. We can't just ask the survey if it's working. So we're going to have to use an experiment. And we'll have to compare one SPF equal to 50 and one SPF greater than 50. Okay, so determine how we can create this random sample. We're just going to have to go to the store. Maybe we throw them into a basket. Maybe we randomly select one off the shelf. Maybe we number them. Maybe we, we put them on a basket. We close our eyes and we randomly pick one, or we number them and use a random number generator to pick them. But you're just going to have to randomly select or select 2 sunscreens, and then to apply them, maybe you apply she's worried about her face, right? So maybe on one side of her face she puts the one that's exactly SPF, one that's not SPF. And then we just compare the results. Did one side get burned? Did one side not get burned? There's different factors that could affect it, like did you lay evenly on both sides? Was one side more prone to the sun? Whatever it might be. But just in general, that's kind of how we can do an experiment. First, you got to randomly select them, and then maybe apply one to each side, and then you just compare them to see. All right, that's it. So do a lot of critical thinking for your classroom.